Welcome to Fort Worth Innovates, a show about innovation, research, entrepreneurship, and startups in Panther City. My name is Cameron Cushman, and I'm the host of this podcast that brings you the stories of the people that are putting our city on the map as a leader in innovation, with the help of the Fort Worth Tarrant County Innovation Partnership. My guest today is Dr. David Snow, the Executive Director of Pegasus Park, a 26-acre innovation hub in Dallas, located in the former Mobil Oil headquarters. Prior to leading Pegasus Park, Snow held several senior leadership roles at the University of Arkansas and at Texas Tech. So why are we featuring a Dallas-based innovation district on a Fort Worth podcast? Well, because we want to learn from him about the value that an innovation district can bring to innovation, research development, job creation, and economic development in our city. David, welcome to the Fort Worth Innovates podcast.
Cameron, thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, let's start with Pegasus Park. I just gave a brief overview about it, but where are you currently? And tell us a little bit about how this innovation ecosystem based on biotech and life sciences is coming about. How did Pegasus Park come to be, and where are you in its development?
It's a great question. So, we have been in existence for about 5 years as Pegasus Park. Um, uh, you know, Historically, it's kind of interesting. Pegasus Park was originally constructed in 1970 as headquarters for Zale Corp and was sold to Mobil Oil Corporation in about 1981, I think. And in 2015, J Small Investments, which is a North Texas focused real estate investment firm, purchased the campus and subsequently partnered with Montgomery Street Partners and an affiliate of Lyda Hill Philanthropies to redevelop it into Pegasus Park as it stands today. So we launched in 2020, which is kind of a terrible time to have launched one of these things and invite everyone to come together in an innovation hub, but it actually is worked out remarkably well. Uh, so we are moving past, I would say, we're not an emerging innovation hub anymore. The acceleration, the velocity of development has been remarkable. So when we purchased the campus, there was about 500,000 square feet developed, and today we're just under 1 million square feet. And so we've got biolabs, which is 38,000 square feet, an innovation incubator space for wet lab space for early stage biotech companies. And in the tower, we've got about 500,000 square feet. We also have Bridge Labs, which is the graduate level laboratory space that was developed for companies that are growing up and needing to scale.
Yeah, and I'll just highlight here too, it is also located literally right across the street, even though the street is I-35 from UT Southwestern, also a big research and healthcare hub, obviously. So the location is a really great place to do this activity. But one instrumental part in this whole thing has been Lyda Hill Philanthropies and LH Capital. Can you tell me about the role that they have played to build out Pegasus Park, and what is the vision from Lyda Hill and those entities?
Oh, that's great. Great question. Because, in the past years, local entrepreneurs here in this area, scientists and researchers often moved to the East or the West Coast to launch their enterprises due to easier access to funding and resources. So we wanted to keep them in North Texas to develop their new ventures. Benefits to the local communities include a surge in top quality and high paying technical jobs, an increase in intellectual capital, and a rise in access to cutting edge healthcare. So Pegasus Park is a big win on all of those accounts. An economic engine, bringing highly desirable STEM jobs to North Texas. And it's also a spot for nonprofits to locate and collaborate and bring about, greater good, the social impact and the societal benefit that we talk about, which innovation hubs bring together. So, you're talking about the vision there. There were several studies that were done prior to the launch of Pegasus Park. I mentioned JSI and those folks that came in and looked at this as not just a typical corporate office real estate development opportunity. If you get up here on the 16th floor of the tower and you look around, the proximity is critical, right? Because you're literally right across the street from UT Southwestern. You can look back and see the cranes developing the Children's Hospital, which is billions of dollars of investment. Parkland Health is just right next to them. Texas Women's University is here. And you look down at the design district, and then, that you see the cityscape of Dallas. And I know this is Fort Worth podcast, so I won't talk about how pretty that cityscape is, but it's a beautiful place. And what, the realization came about was like, okay, there's something better. There's a better opportunity here, and we need, patient capital to invest in something and create this opportunity for a sticky environment for the biotech side of this world to see if we can retain some of that intellectual capital and some of the talent coming out of these top tier research institutions and prevent them from going because there's such a outsized economic impact. One of the studies I mentioned was that, there was something like 60 companies in the 5 years leading up to the launch of Pegasus Park that had received funding and left for the coast. And if you do an analysis on what they've raised beyond that, you're talking about billions of dollars, billions, over $10 billion of economic impact that we lost on. And so now we have this opportunity to create this sticky environment. And we've recently done some studies. Like I said, we've been around for 5 years. We did a pitch book study and looked back and said, well, what has actually happened with the biotech side of the companies that are here at Pegasus Park? Because we do have 35 nonprofits in the tower, and there's 6 different institutions of higher education that have a presence here. So there's and a suite of entrepreneurial support organizations and that have investment vehicles alongside of those. All of that is aggregated and convened here at Pegasus Park. But on the biotech side, we looked at a pitch book study. And I think when we did the analysis, they had raised collectively. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 different biotechs that have been here over the last 5 years. They've raised collectively somewhere around $1.4 billion. And I think since we even looked at that study, there's been another 300 million that they've raised. Which translates to somewhere in the neighborhood of a $14 billion, valuation for those organizations. So if you're thinking from a capital perspective, that's a massive opportunity and a huge win for our local and a regional economic from a local and economic perspective.
So from Lida Hill's perspective, this has been a good investment, huh?
Well, it absolutely has. But Lida Hill herself, this isn't the only impact investment she's made. This is probably one of the largest in North Texas for sure. But she has given capital that seeded MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. She's given capital that refurbished the stockyards in Fort Worth. She seeded capital for Garden of the Gods in Colorado. You can kind of go down the list of the things that she has done from a philanthropic perspective, which there's also a capital investment side of that have created outsized returns. But from a philanthropic perspective, she's just a remarkable human in terms of what she has been able to accomplish. If you look out chronologically at what has happened in the outsized returns and local economic impact from those original seed investments.
So to quote the Dallasite and the late H. Ross Perot, he talked about this giant sucking sound, and he was talking about NAFTA right back in the day, and that all these jobs were going to go to Mexico. But it's been a similar concept, as you indicated, towards the coasts, that biotech innovation can only happen in California and Boston, right, or New York, and whatever that looks like. But one of the things that I love that that Pegasus Park has done is brought some of these institutions that have traditionally been coastal to the center of the country, to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I'm thinking in particular about biolabs. So tell me what biolabs is and how does that figure into developing future cures and treatments and companies that are going to bring research to market?
Yeah, great question. So, Pegasus Park, and I'll kind of couch this from a perspective about Pegasus Park. Our mission, is really to build a science park, a live, work, play, and learn environment that convenes resources together. And we don't intend to own everything, but we want to help influence how that gets developed. So a perfect example of that is biolabs at Pegasus Park. Biolabs, I mentioned, is a 38,000 square foot life science incubator space. Biolabs actually is also an international company, a corporation that manages those wet lab spaces. And they have a model that is, creates month to month access for early stage companies to walk in, immediately get access to $5 million worth of equipment that we have here at Pegasus Park, and literally begin collecting data the first day. So why does that matter? If you're an early stage biotech company, usually a seed ask just to start the company, you're talking about $5 or $6 million. It's very expensive to do life science research and innovation. And the majority of that first ask is actually money that you're asking investors to give you to help create the right environment, the laboratory itself, and the equipment that you need to be able to launch and start. So at a biolabs, you can walk in on month one, your $6 million can actually shrink by half or even more to 3 million or 2 million and still get the same 18-month runway, which makes it very, very attractive for investors to say, well, I can shrink my check. I can give you an 18-month runway if you're part of this overall ecosystem. We partnered with biolabs because their model, they don't take any equity into the companies that are there. That's important because we wanted to stay off the cap table as much as possible. We want those companies to be able to be very attractive for follow-on investments past that seed stage company, and the outsized economics that I just talked about a second ago, that is reflective of the the velocity with which those companies can come in, collect their data, hit their milestones, and begin working on fundraising for additional rounds.
Very cool. Yeah. And I love that you can put them through this process. You have the spaces, the equipment to literally take it from idea or research or initial testing to, functioning company that's growing rapidly. But give me a sense of some of the companies that are at Pegasus Park. You don't have to name names, but just give me a sense of like, can you kind of make these things that you're talking about real? Like, what are some of these companies working on? What problems are they tackling, and how are they working?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got two different faces at Pegasus Park. We've got the water cooler, the research institutions that are here, but we've also got the biotechs. And so I would just say that, there's different ways to approach that question. From the biotech perspective, we have a suite of organizations that have collected, the early stage companies that are there working on everything from cell therapies. We've got some that are working on cancer therapeutics, molecular therapeutics, devices. Some are more tech-enabled companies using AI and data to, uh, uh, to develop theoretical research opportunities. So there are a suite of organizations that are pursuing different types of innovations in the biotech space. And well, the other thing I would say is that I mentioned entrepreneurial support organizations. That's also a group that is, aggregating and convening at Pegasus Park as well. So we have Mass Challenge, for example, which is a national organization that originated in Massachusetts. They're not their name isn't actually about Massachusetts, but that's what they're called. We have Alloy Therapeutics. Of course, our local group, Health Wildcatters, with Hubert Zajac, incredible guy, incredible organization. These programs, they some of them run as venture studios where they are investing in the companies that they are accelerating over a period of time. Some run as entrepreneurial support organizations, so they're trying to help innovators and um, you know aspiring entrepreneurs get themselves investment ready. The next phase of that is many of those organizations have investment vehicles attached, so they can invest in those companies that they are looking at from an earliest stage, or they can choose not to, or they can help actually introduce those companies to other investor networks that maybe that particular technology or company is a better fit for their investment thesis.
Yeah, so I love that you mentioned ESOs, entrepreneurial support organizations, and you've got those mixed in with some of the investors. You've got those mixed in with the scientists, the researchers, and the startup companies. How does putting all of those disparate entities together in one place on one campus contribute to innovation?
Yeah, it's just fantastic. And so, as we're talking about, I mentioned science parks, right? So there's actually different types of innovation hubs that exist. I'll kind of use some language that hopefully makes sense to the audience here, but we'll
Educate
take a
us,
look at
please.
it. Yeah, we'll take a look at it from two things: from the primary partner's perspective, and from technology readiness level perspective. Right. So a lot of times, what you hear research parks. Sometimes you hear the word science park. Sometimes you hear industrial park, and so these terms are often interchanged really incorrectly. So what I would like to do is sort of define those as we're thinking about what that looks like. So the first one that I mentioned is a research park. A research park is really usually driven by institution of higher education. A lot of times it's on their land and their property, and so they're really focused on basic research. And most of the time, those research parks are developing technologies from technology readiness level 1 through 3. So let me just correct myself a little bit. The technology readiness level is really along a continuum for commercialization. That's sort of a commercialization pipeline where 1 to 3 is early stage, 4 to 6 is really translational. Um, 7 to 9, you're actually producing a product or service that's going into the market, right? And so that's kind of the continuum of commercialization that we'll talk about. So from research park, you also can have a technology park, which is really focused on that technology readiness level 4 through 6. The next phase of this, or sometimes people interchange the terms using industrial park. An industrial park is really more focused on something that's manufactured. So that's usually larger organizations, technology readiness levels 7 through 9, and they're trying to fabricate something that's fitting a demand product, into the market. When I talk about a science park is actually all of the above. It's an environment where you cluster organizations and resources together that allow you to support innovation from ideation, which is happening, and anybody can be an innovator, but happening predominantly in research institutions where they are thinking about advancing science all the way through this continuum of commercialization towards product market entrance. So you don't have to necessarily produce everything in a science park, although that opportunity exists. But the relationships and the core features of that innovation happen in that zone, and then it can move out into larger scale manufacturing.
That is fascinating, and yes, you're right that's a very deep rabbit hole we could probably go way down. But I do think it's important to understand some of those terms and the way that this has traditionally worked in other places, for us to understand what this can mean for Fort Worth. Um, but I want to switch gears just real fast. Speaking of those kind of research parks and science parks and things like that, you are about to host the AURP conference in Dallas, I think later this year in 2026. Tell us what AURP is and what that conference is going to look like.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for the opportunity to share this. So, Association of University Research Parks is the acronym for AURP, but it's been around for 40 years, and so the name doesn't necessarily fit the trade organization anymore because while there's a huge contingency of place-based innovation focused people from universities, it also includes this broader ecosystem of leaders in innovation hubs and science parks, as well as developers and people that invest in innovation hubs. It's a different type of investment. You have to be a little bit more patient because we're talking about creating outsized returns. Activating a particular piece of property And I mentioned research parks, industrial parks, and these things. Those are typically activated 8 to 10 hours a day. And a science park is activated 20 to 24 hours a day. So you really get this outsized return on the valuation of your property if you're looking at it from a commercial real estate perspective in a science park. So the conference itself brings together investors in this space. It also brings architects and developers and firms that represent these organizations into one space. And the whole pretext of it is to understand best practices from an international perspective, opportunities and how to actually structure public-private partnerships and relationships to help drive development in these spaces. And so it's a huge opportunity to learn if you're interested in place-based innovation. And so, we've got a couple of different tracks. We've obviously have a biotech track because we're hosting it at Pegasus, and that's one of the things we're really good at. But we also have an air and space track that I'm really excited about because that's something that is there's so much expertise in the state of Texas in and around that space that we're really looking forward to highlighting.
Absolutely. And we're good at air and space here in Fort Worth. That is for sure, from aviation and Lockheed and Bell and Elbit, of course, to American Airlines. We got a lot of that going on here. So I would love for Fort Worth to get involved from that perspective and from a bunch of different perspectives. But let me shift to Fort Worth for a second. So you've done a great job educating us about Pegasus Park, what it is. You've done a great job educating us about what a research park is, what you're trying to build, or what's going on around the country, kind of a national trend of these. But let's take it back to Fort Worth. There are several efforts around innovation districts in Fort Worth right now. One of them is the Mobility Innovation Zone at Alliance. The other one is the newly announced Switchyard Innovation District in the southeast corner of downtown. But how do you see those? Are they a competitor to what you're doing at Pegasus Park, or do you see them as a complement?
No, it's absolutely a compliment. It's not a competition, and I'll tell you why. Uh, you know, innovation hubs, science parks, they all emerge ultimately with a certain areas of excellence, business verticals, where they are the best place for an early stage company or an innovator who has ideas to go to ensure the most reasonable likelihood of success because the ecosystem supports that particular business vertical the most efficiently. And so when we talk about these science parks and how they're developing, you know, Pegasus Park, our fingerprint is emerging around synthetic biology and biotech, and so we have that traction and that momentum going in that direction. Each one of these other innovation zones that are developing, they're not competitive because they're made up of different people and different companies. So those people and those companies are going to bring together their expertise. And what will emerge is the most reasonable likelihood of success for X, whatever X is. And so, what we want to do from a local perspective is, and I describe these as soft landing sites because we see deal flow. People say, well, Pegasus Park is the way to be. But then they get here, they engage, and we meet them, the ecosystem meets them, and they say, from a business perspective, your most reasonable likelihood of success is here, or maybe it's over there. And so we want to make introductions where it makes the most sense, so that people can move and drop into these zones and get engaged. Because it takes a village to raise a startup, and you've got to have the right support system around you in order to be able to succeed as an innovator, commercializing early stage technologies. And so the facilities themselves, going back to what we're building at Pegasus Park, we're not building spaces hoping people come. We're using the programmatic activity, which by that I mean the people and the companies that exist here, to drive what the future real estate needs to look like.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. It's some companies may find, better resources at another innovation park, but at least they're not moving to the West Coast. At least they're not leaving the Metroplex in general. And the more that we can do to work together on some of these kind of things, I think is going to help everybody. Um, So I want to switch to a second to a different topic. This has been a criticism that has recently been levied that the city of Fort Worth has waived several of the permitting and building fees for the new Texas A&M Fort Worth campus downtown because they're building up to 5 buildings, the first of which will be occupied in just a few months, later this year in 2026. What is your thought on that? What do you think is the ROI that Fort Worth can expect from an innovation district to sort of justify waiving some of these fees? How does an incentive like this compare to other corporate recruiting or relocation packages that we see all the time where we try to recruit companies in from around the country and around the world to set up shop in our hometown?
Yeah, I can understand people's perspective when they think about, man, these are tax incentives, especially if you're near or adjacent to that innovation hub or that zone that makes you think, I didn't get that when I was starting.
Right.
Why are they doing this for them? It's a great question, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that you're going to benefit immensely from those decisions. Those are actually pretty small potatoes considering the outsized returns that innovation hubs bring to the local economy. I'll give you some statistics. So I've got a really good friend, Laurel Blennis, who leads an organization called Stiletto, and they did an economic impact summary study just a couple of months ago. Actually, they released it. And so there were 120 different AURP member parks. We talked about that conference that's coming up that submitted information and data aggregation to create this report. Um, just across the United States, those innovation parks created like 16,000 deep tech jobs. Those innovation parks contributed $2 billion in regional GDP. There's over $1 billion in those parks in annual wages. So from an economic perspective, there's huge benefits. Uh, you know, so and I said that's what they created. There's 2.5 million jobs are supported totally, in innovation parks. So what you can expect to happen when this gets going and launched and running are some serious outsized returns. The other thing that I would say from a social benefit, social impact perspective, that most people don't realize that in True Innovation Hub, over 40% of the jobs that exist there just require a high school education. And so you get opportunities created for people to be near and adjacent deep tech innovation. What does that mean? That means people are getting exposure that they would never otherwise get, that they would get interested in STEM education and STEM jobs, that they would actually have a vision for how they could, engage in the future in these spaces of innovation. And so, from that perspective, it's immensely beneficial from a societal impact perspective. So I can tell you that, when you look at um, from a commercial real estate perspective. So I've kind of given you a couple of different glimpses at this, but just if you're a commercial real estate person and you look at occupancy rates inside innovation hubs versus outside, outside in office space, you've got somewhere around 87% occupancy. Inside innovation hubs, you have over 91% occupancy. When you start looking at survival rates of startups outside innovation hubs and innovation zones have a difficult time in succeeding. Where the national average for success is below 50%, over a 3 to 5 year glimpse. Where inside an innovation hub, there's over a 75% success rate. So you're going to start seeing outsized returns. Those deep tech jobs pay more money. They spend more money locally. They have the resources to engage in the restaurants locally and the hotels. They bring in, outside interest from their advisory boards and governance boards that create relationship opportunities locally for Fort Worth. And I can talk about the constructive collisions that happen here at Pegasus Park all the time, and even some of the unintended consequences of having social impact next to biotech, where you've got all of those boards coming in into Pegasus Park on a daily basis. And the running joke is, you better show up 45 minutes early to Pegasus because you're going to run into somebody walking in that you should have already talked to. And those constructive collisions are really where innovative ideas get shared. The elevator pitch idea, the personal 2-minute story. You hear people telling those stories all the time, and then the next stage is, well, let's get together for coffee. Let's go grab a beer at a community beer or something like that. And so it's very, very beneficial, and I'm excited about what's going to happen in Fort Worth.
Well, you and I could talk about this for hours, but we'd probably lose every one of our audience members. So I want to just kind of boil it down. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned along your career and at Pegasus Park that you can teach us about how we should think about developing our innovation ecosystem and our innovation districts in Fort Worth?
Yeah, I mean, innovation hubs. So there's two perspectives generally from economic development. There's the business attraction perspective, which is go out and find people and recruit. And then there's the grow your own strategy. And I'll tell you that universities and innovation hubs are very successful at growing your own. In fact, because they are successful, they become the primary attractant for external business attraction. These environments become magnetic. And what do I mean by that? The reason people engage in place-based innovation is, universities engage because they want to commercialize intellectual property and they want to attract, retain, and develop talent. From their perspective, it's not really about the real estate. But as you change partners, in the innovation space itself, a company is there because they need some type of competitive advantage, which is the access to the intellectual capital or the access to the talent that's getting developed. So this cluster effect is really what creates those outsized returns. So when, the lessons learned are look locally first. These are opportunities. And if you're thinking about why is this important to me? I own a restaurant adjacent, like if you're thinking about those things, you have Main Street experience, and you're talking to a lot of times innovators, early stage, would-be entrepreneurs that have tremendous education backgrounds that are, uniquely qualified to do very special things that most of the time don't have that Main Street experience. So you getting engaged early and becoming part of these networking events and opportunities is really going to do things. It's going to stretch you a little bit because you're going to hear about things and learn about things that you maybe didn't understand before, but you're going to figure out that you actually have a whole lot to bring to the table, in terms of relationship building and advisory, and it'll create unique partnership opportunities. So I would say, don't ignore it, embrace it, get involved, because you're gonna have more fun than you ever had in your life.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, innovation is fun. That is definitely true. David, can you give us a glimpse of the future of innovation districts?
Yes, I can. It's really interesting because globally there are several countries like China that really have recognized science parks as the best agents of regional economic transformation. And I won't go into the details of all of that, except to say that, they are investing very, very heavily in other countries around the world to develop these science parks because of the recognition of the unique capabilities that emerge in that cluster effect that we talked about just a minute ago. The people and the companies that are there are all unique, and that creates a very unique competitive advantage in specific business verticals. What are the outsized returns? I'll give you the example of Taiwan. 90% of Taiwan's GDP comes from 4 science parks. All right. So like that should give you just a glimpse of the impact that these types of innovation centers create economically. So these are massive growth centers. if I mentioned China, I would just say that, they've got 115 science parks. The top 10 of their science parks contribute 500 billion. The good news is that America, is getting engaged in this space as well. I talked about 120 different, national innovation hubs and science parks here. They're contributing about 300 billion in GDP to the United States economy and supporting 2.5 million jobs. And and creating the tax incentives. I mean, they're like 33 billion overall in federal taxes are paid out of science park tenants. So I would just say that there's hope, but there needs to be some cohesiveness. And I think Texas is really thinking about that. So I'm excited about that. We've got HB 112, which probably isn't perfect, but there are ways to amend that, where that could be an interesting resource. Opportunity zones at the federal level, that's getting looked at again this year, and how that relates both from an investment perspective, investment in the development, and then also incentives for investors investing in companies that are located in opportunity zones. So there's different layers where these benefits can really help. We do need a cohesive approach in the United States, and I think Texas is actually thinking about it uniquely. I'm a proud Texan, and so this is a way that from a policy standpoint, we can really engage and get our ducks in a row and invest in these. And I commend Fort Worth. You mentioned Fort Worth and some of the tax incentives they gave. I really commend Fort Worth and their leadership for making that investment in the future, because they're going to get outsized returns from that.
Okay, so you are a Texan, and you've worked in Lubbock, you've worked in Arkansas, you're sitting in Dallas right now. But what is your favorite innovation in Fort Worth?
Oh, it's going to be the A&M System campus. I mean, that just because I'm so engaged in place-based innovation, there are a number of organizations, companies that are doing some amazing things. But I can tell you that 15, 20 years from now, there that capability, the growth of that system campus, is going to potentially shift the economic trajectory of the city of Fort Worth. There will be some outsized returns that are going to be hard to wrap your mind around. And I gave you some of the statistics, that of Pegasus Park. And I'm excited to see what Fort Worth is going to do in air and space, and even in film. Some of the things they're doing over there, is just really fantastic.
David, thank you so much for joining me today on Fort Worth Innovates. If you like hearing stories about innovation, research, entrepreneurship, and startups in our city, please subscribe and be sure to tell a friend. The more you engage, the more episodes we can bring to you. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Fort Worth Innovates is produced by Kendall Rogers. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this podcast, the Fort Worth Tarrant County Innovation Partnership, who are building an innovation district where technology and research combine to build the future, right here, right now.